Let me tell you about a Christmas Eve I will never forget, though I wish I could. What happened that night? Well, let's just say it made me question everything I thought I knew about the holiday season. This isn't a story of joy or cheer. This is a story about the darkness that hides behind the lights. It was Christmas Eve, and I had decided to spend the night at an old cabin my family owned. I wanted a quiet holiday, away from the noise of the city. The cabin was tucked deep in the woods, miles from the nearest neighbor. It was an old place, but it held memories. My grandparents used to bring me here when I was a kid, but they never let me stay past sunset. I always thought they were being overprotective. I didn't understand why they seemed uneasy about the cabin at night. Now, I wish I had listened. That evening, everything was peaceful at first. I decorated the small Christmas tree, lit a fire, and settled in with a cup of cocoa. The only sounds were the crackling of the fire and the wind outside. Around midnight, I heard something strange. It started as a faint tapping sound, like fingers lightly drumming on the windows. I froze. The cabin was surrounded by snow. No one could have gotten this far without leaving tracks. When I looked out the window, there was nothing but darkness and falling snow. I told myself it was probably a branch swaying in the wind and tried to ignore it. But then the tapping moved. It wasn't coming from just one window anymore. It was coming from all of them. I grabbed a flashlight and aimed it at the window nearest to me. For a second, I thought I saw something, a shadow, quick and fleeting, darting past the edge of the light. My heart started pounding. I locked all the doors and closed the curtains. But as soon as I turned my back, I heard a soft creak from the kitchen. I wasn't alone. With the flashlight in hand as I made my way toward the sound, the kitchen was empty, but the back door was slightly ajar, snow blowing in through the crack. And then I saw them footprints. Bare, wet footprints leading from the door, but they didn't look human. They were long, with claw-like impressions at the tips of each toe. I slammed the door shut and locked it. I tried calling someone, anyone, but there was no signal. The tapping returned, louder this time and more insistent. It wasn't coming from the windows anymore. It was coming from the ceiling. I didn't want to look, but something compelled me. Slowly, I tilted my head up, and there it was. A figure crouched on the wooden beams above me, its limbs impossibly long, its face hidden in the shadows. I didn't think. I just ran. I grabbed the keys and bolted for the door, but it was locked from the outside. The thing stood in the corner of the room, watching me with its head tilted, as if amused by my panic. I backed away slowly, but it lunged at me, moving faster than anything I'd ever seen. I swung the flashlight, hitting it in the face, and for a moment it recoiled, letting out an ear-piercing screech. That gave me just enough time to smash a window and climb out. I ran barefoot through the snow, the freezing cold biting into my skin, but I didn't care. I could hear it chasing me, its claws scraping against the trees as it moved. When I reached my car, I didn't even bother brushing the snow off the windshield. I started the engine and sped off, not stopping until I reached the nearest town. The locals didn't believe me. They said the cabin had been abandoned for decades, that no one had lived there since the previous owner disappeared under mysterious circumstances. I don't know what that thing was, but it's still out there, and every Christmas Eve, I can't help but wonder, is it looking for me? So, if you ever find yourself alone on Christmas Eve and you hear tapping on your windows, don't look, don't investigate, just leave. Because sometimes the shadows of Christmas aren't as harmless as they seem. Hello, I am here today to tell you a true and terrifying story that happened to me a few years ago on Christmas Eve. It was the night that completely changed my outlook on this happy occasion. What I am about to tell you is not just a story, it is something I experienced myself, and I still relive it in my dreams to this day. So sit down, light the fire, because what I am about to tell you will make you think twice before celebrating Christmas Eve next year. It was Christmas Eve, and I was alone in our country house. The house was old, surrounded by a thick forest, and everything was covered in snow. It was very quiet, and perhaps that made things even more strange that night. After I finished decorating the Christmas tree, I decided to sit down and enjoy a classic movie. Suddenly, the power went out. I knew it was due to the snow, but I wasn't prepared for the complete darkness that enveloped the place. I lit some candles and sat on the couch, trying to calm myself down. But something was off. I felt like I wasn't alone. At first, it was just soft noises, like rustling leaves. Then I started hearing what sounded like light footsteps on the snow outside the house. I looked out the window, but there was no one there. I tried to ignore it and convince myself that they were just small animals looking for warmth. But a few minutes later, I heard a soft knock on the front door. "Who's there?" I shouted in a trembling voice, but no response came. When I opened the door, there was no one there, just footprints in the snow, but they weren't human. They were strange footprints, small but deep, as if they belonged to a being I'd never seen before. After I got back inside, I noticed something strange. There was cold air coming out from under the stairs leading to the basement. The strange thing was that I had never used the basement. It had been closed for years. I felt a strange urge to explore. I took my flashlight and went down. The basement was filled with old boxes and dusty things. As I was searching, I noticed a small door hidden behind one of the shelves. The door looked very old, as if it hadn't been opened in decades. When I opened it, I discovered a small dark room with a table and chairs, and on the table was an old photo of a family I had never seen before. What terrified me was that one of the people in the picture looked exactly like me, like an old version of me. Next to the picture, there was a diary. I started reading the diary, which was written in shaky handwriting. The person who wrote it was describing his experiences in the house itself and how he began to feel like he was being watched. The last page of the notebook contained a strange message. If you are reading this now, he is close by. Don't look back. I froze. I felt something standing behind me. But when I turned around, there was no one there. At that moment, I heard a terrifying sound coming from upstairs. It was a faint laugh, but it wasn't human. I took the notebook and ran towards the main door, but the door wouldn't open. I was locked inside. The lights began to swing strangely, and the candles went out one by one. I felt as if something invisible was approaching me. In a moment of desperation, I decided to jump out of the kitchen window. Despite the bitter cold and the injuries I sustained, I ran as fast as I could towards the main road, where I found a neighbor who was returning in his car. I told him everything, but he didn't believe me. When we returned the next day, the house looked completely normal. The hidden room was gone, as if it had never existed. But I still have the picture and the notebook. They are the only evidence of that terrible night. To this day, I don't certain know what happened that night, but I have learned one thing. Not everything that happens on Christmas Eve is happy. Sometimes the brightest nights are the darkest. Christmas is supposed to be a time of joy and celebration, but for me, it's a reminder of something horrifying, something that I still can't explain. This story happened to me 5 years ago, and to this day, I can't bring myself to hang a Christmas wreath on my door. What I'm about to tell you isn't just a story, it's a warning. It all started when I moved into a new house during December. It was a quiet neighborhood filled with holiday cheer. Every house on the street was decorated, lights, ornaments, and of course, Christmas wreaths on every door. My house was no different, except for one small detail. The previous owner had left an old wreath hanging on the front door. It was beautiful, but strangely out of place. The deep green branches were woven tightly, adorned with red berries that looked too real, almost like they had just been plucked from a bush. At first, I thought it was a kind gesture, something left behind to welcome me, but I should have known better. From the moment I stepped into that house, things didn't feel right. The first night, I noticed something strange. The wreath seemed different. At first, I thought it was my imagination. Maybe the dim lighting was playing tricks on me. But no matter how many times I checked, it looked like the berries had moved. I laughed it off. I mean, how could a wreath possibly move? But as the days went by, I started to notice other things. It began with small noises, soft whispers when I walked past the door. Sometimes I would catch a faint rustling sound, like someone was brushing against the door from the outside. But when I opened it, there was nothing there, just the wreath, swaying gently, even when there was no wind. One afternoon, my neighbor, Mrs. Harper, came by with cookies to welcome me to the neighborhood. She was a sweet old woman, but the moment she saw the wreath, her expression changed. "Where did you get that?" she asked, her voice trembling. I told her it had been left by the previous owner. Her face turned pale, and she whispered, "You need to get rid of it now." When I pressed her for details, she refused to say more, only muttering something about the house's history. Before she left, she grabbed my arm and said, "Don't let it inside." At the time, I thought she was just being superstitious, but later that night, I realized she wasn't exaggerating. That night, I woke up to a strange sound. It was a scratching noise, faint but insistent, coming from the front door. My heart raced as I crept down the stairs, flashlight in hand. When I reached the door, the scratching stopped. I stared at the wreath, feeling a chill run down my spine. The berries looked darker, almost black, and for the first time, I noticed something else, a faint, sickly sweet smell, like rotting fruit. I turned to go back upstairs, but then I heard it, a voice. "Let me in." It was faint, barely above a whisper, but I heard it clear as day. I froze, my hand gripping the flashlight so tightly it hurt. The voice came again, more insistent this time. "Let me in." I don't know what possessed me, but I opened the door. The night was still, the snow untouched, but the wreath, it wasn't hanging on the door anymore. It was on the ground, its berries scattered across the porch like drops of blood. I slammed the door shut and locked it, but the scratching didn't stop. It was louder now, coming from all around me. Walls, windows, even the ceiling, and then I saw it. The wreath was inside. It lay in the middle of the living room, the berries pulsating like they were alive, the branches twisted and coiled, forming a shape, a face. It grinned at me, and the voice came again, louder this time. "You shouldn't have let me in." I ran. I didn't care about anything else. I grabbed my keys and fled the house, driving to the nearest motel. I stayed there until morning, too afraid to return. When I finally worked up the courage to go back, the wreath was gone. The house was eerily quiet, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was still watching me. I moved out a week later, leaving everything behind. I don't know what that wreath was or why it was left on my door, but I know this: it wasn't meant to bring holiday cheer. Every Christmas since, I felt its presence. Sometimes I wake up at night and hear faint scratching sounds, even in my new home, and sometimes I think I hear it whispering, "Let me in." If you ever find a Christmas wreath on your door that you didn't put there, don't touch it. Don't bring it inside. Just leave. Some gifts aren't meant to be opened. Fade to black. Text appears. Do you believe in cursed objects? Share your stories in the comments below.